This episode of the Sixth Sense Report contains some language, graphic descriptions, and may not be suitable for young children. Listener discretion is advised.
If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye. Come on. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joe Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
Oh, I thought you were going to say and Snoop Dogg.
Snoop Dogg. Yeah, Snoop Dogg too.
You got that little Snoop Dogg swagger going on. It's good, man. It's good.
I don't know if the listeners know, but that hear ye is actually a line from Snoop, actually.
Yeah, I was good, but you usually don't have the Snoop Dogg swagger.
I know. What the everybody got the cuss, but they ain't chipped in. Now this type of thing happens all the time. You got to get yours before I got to get mine. Everything is fine when you listen to the Sixth Sense Report.
Good times. No, but even the way you did the also I'll call it the twang in your voice. In the intro
Hey man, I think you know what, I have a GOAT list of the funniest, entertaining, more personable rappers in rap history. So I have Snoop as number one, as like the most personable, funny, entertaining guy to rap, and then second I have Fat Joe. Yesterday's price is not today's price. Right?
Well, how big does your list go? What is it? Top 10? Top 5?
I'm actually making it. I just made it up, and I've been wrestling with who would be the third one. Because Fat Joe. When Irv Gotti was talking reckless about Ashanti, and he came on, he just said, Irv Gotti, yeah, he's a sucker. He's a sucker, man. He's just a sucker. So those two guys. I haven't thought of a third one. Listeners, if there's a third one, funny, entertaining rappers of all time, who should I add the third?
Yeah, I think funny is a good nuance, because entertaining rappers of all time, like, I think you could easily come up with a top 10 real quick, just based on stage presence, things like that. But adding the comedic side to it,
commentary, or just flat out just hearing them talk is just funny guys, right? Like shooting when they're on podcast, shooting the breeze. Those guys are funny.
Have you seen Kevin Hart and Snoop Dogg doing sports commentating?
Yes, that motherfucker don't miss. That motherfucker don't miss.
I've seen that highlight reel.
That motherfucker don't miss.
All right,
we gotta get him on the show, man. We gotta get him on the show.
What, Snoop?
Yeah, we can do it.
Yeah. Just
I know friends who know him. I know guys who know him.
Oh, dude.
Right?
You got to come and get those guys to come through.
Ryan, who did our press photos, man. I see him on Instagram hanging out with Snoop, man. I still got his phone number.
Get him to record our intro, and then you don't have to do it no more.
Oh yeah, that'd be tough.
Anyways, we're talking about the Queen, not the
king.
Jester.
No, not the king of hip hop comedy. So the Queen, yes, Queen Elizabeth III. Yes, so she passed away, and longest reigning monarch.
8, 2022.
September 8, 2022.
So,
so for the listeners, the direction of the conversation will be getting into the theology is God for monarchies, and we'll unpack that. Canada, for as it relates to Canadians, Quebec versus the Queen, and then we're going to look at the economic perspective. Was she a good queen? So let's start with the theology side. Now, there's an inscription that says De Gratia Regina. The inscription that is on every coin, or even every medal given by the Queen, is in the Commonwealth DG Regina. It translates as queen by the grace of God, or reigning by the grace of God.
So, I mean, that tells us, let's call it some legacy to the origins of, or not, origins may not be the right word, some, let's say, theological legacy to both the monarchy, this monarchy, but
Is God
also,
for monarchies?
pardon?
Is God for monarchies?
My view would be he's neutral. And I would base that, or I say that because I would say that he's also neutral or amoral with respect to government in general. Not to say, like, my view on, without going down the rabbit hole too far, on Romans 13, that these things are under God's sovereignty and he may ordain them for a time for his purpose. But at the same time, the question of, is God instituting or calling us to institute any given type of government, is why I would say neutral, because, monarchy in and of itself is one form of government. Now, for the most part, we've gotten away from it, but arguably all of Romans 13 is in reference to monarchies. Not totally, but my point is that at the time,
in the historical context,
that is what type of government existed predominantly when the text was written.
Yeah.
And so my point is, it's neutral because the form of government and instituting a monarchy is not at all prescribed. Although it was the common, take all of Jewish history, most of the Bible, right, being under a king and monarchy type system. What would you say? Is God for monarchies?
I would say yes, he is for monarchies, because Jesus Christ is king. And I would argue he is the antitype, if I'm correct, antitype, and that all other governments are the type. If we're talking typology, it's just a shadow of the true governmental structures that we'll see in the eschaton, in the new heavens and the new earth. Jesus Christ reigning as king on the throne. So I would say that God leans towards the monarchy, and as it relates to Queen Elizabeth, or what, man, any monarch, anybody who's ruling, is appointed by God in his sovereignty. That doesn't necessarily make it his favorite person, right? Who's ever ruling, right? Hence the term "by the grace of God," right? We look at 1 Samuel 8, right? Who does Israel have as their first king? Right? They have Saul, and Saul's a terrible king, right? So we're saying that God is being gracious, right? By the grace of God, she rules, and there's nothing good about Queen Elizabeth II that God chose her to make her reign, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think God is going to use any given monarch, right? And so in terms of his sovereign will, there. If you just look at, I'll go back to I love making this punchline about, look at the Jewish history book with respect to kings. What did we see? Good king, bad king, good king, bad king, good king, bad king. And so, was God for the good king and against the bad king? More or less. So I think God can be for any monarch, or working through or with any monarch could be serving God at the same time.
Yeah. Now, for our second point, Canadians, as it relates to Canadians, Quebec versus the Queen. And so this was an article from the Globe and Mail and talking about the issues Quebecers had with the Queen, which I didn't know was a thing. So the majority of Quebecers don't look kindly on the monarchy for historical reasons, as well as their support for democracy, said Gerald Beauchard, a historian and sociologist who teaches at the University de Quebec. I can't pronounce that word. I'll probably butcher it. But it's in Quebec. Trust me, it's in Quebec. I promise you. It's not Toronto. It's in Quebec. In Quebec, this appears to be a vestige of a colonialist era that we thought had disappeared. He said in an interview, in Quebec, the majority of people would say we don't know why this continues in Canada, and we don't know why this has been imposed on us in Quebec. Last thing, the monarchy was imposed on the people of Quebec by conquest, he said, while the provincial flag, known as the fleur de lis, represents both the right of Quebecers to exist as a people and the province's democracy. We cannot overlook that she represented an institution, the British Crown, that has caused significant harm to Quebecers and Indigenous nations, he told reporters.
It's such a, in there it made this comment that like, why is this forced upon us? And what I'm about to say doesn't mean we shouldn't go against it, but it's our entire Canadian system technically has the Queen as a backstop. And that's an oversimplification, I'm aware. But
Backstop?
like, in the sense that like the Queen actually is, has authority, right? Within our governmental system. Because of the way it's established. And so I only bring that up to say, like, while we don't really utilize that control, while we don't really that backstop is almost never exercised, and may never be, if you had a, let's call it Hitler type character, would we value that backstop? Would that backstop actually come into play and to the benefit of the people? So I only say that to say, these comments sort of are devoid or removed from the idea of like, okay, what do you what do you want instead, right? Like what does it mean to move away? What does that cause our system? How does that cause our democracy system to change? And what would be the benefit of the shortcomings? And so I only say it that way because I'm sort of ignoring history and just purely looking at the system today and saying, okay, if you want to look back in the past and say, okay, because of, what Quebec's criticisms are from, the monarchy being forced on them. If you wanted to make the change, just because what happened in the past was bad doesn't mean that you just blow up what you have today, because maybe there's actual benefits that you're just going to ignore because of your prejudice towards the history, or your grudge towards the history that occurred.
Yeah, no, and I think part of it is trying to think through like what the present day issue with Quebecers dealing with the crown presently and historically, and in our relationship with Quebecers, right? And
Yeah,
that's always been kind of weird.
yes, Canada's had it's just, I mean, when we were kids, man, it was like, oh, Quebec's always going to separate. Like, I don't know. I was like this, which it seems like now looking back, it was never really going to happen. But I thought it was inevitable,
Yeah, I thought it was going
as
to
a
happen
kid.
too.
Like, oh, I guess Quebec's leaving. Apparently they were going to take all of Eastern Canada with them. So,
Right. I know. So then, Joel, like, do you think that it's overstated, that Quebec's kind of blowing things out of proportion?
I mean, obviously this article is written in, the date is September 11th. So it's written in response to all that's gone on. It's written, with, and we'll touch on this in the third point a little bit. So much of the Queen's death has then led to questions that people just didn't want to talk about. And so I don't necessarily think it's overblown, but it's probably a conversation that has been avoided. And now, for whatever reason, conversations about the Commonwealth and, their colonization of the world and all this, the legacy of that has not really been talked about. And if you look at, as I was talking about Canada's system, we have the monarch there, but it's largely a figurehead, although there is sort of authority built in. Largely, if they tried to execute it, it would, and let's say in a scenario outside of what I described as like the Hitler type of scenario, it would likely result in us kicking them out of our, democracy system. And so I only say that because it is Quebec overblowing it. Yes, to some extent, because it's irrelevant. But no, you could argue they haven't because, well, the Queen reigned for so long that I'm sure, 40 years into her reign, they were like, okay, we'll just wait till she's gone before we entertain these conversations. And I think largely most of society, has already, I mean, you can see it, the conversation, and we're going to touch on it with regards to Africa, and a number of countries are starting to sort of go, hey, there's some things that we haven't been talking about. And now that she's gone and some new person's coming into this role, I would be surprised if this conversation doesn't play. I don't know if play out's the right word, but if this conversation doesn't continue, not to say that anything will come of it, but I think this is the beginning of some conversations around this. But I'm also, sort of starting out to move on to the economics piece. I think there's this large amount of ignorance towards how has wealth been accumulated for a very long time.
For the British monarchy?
No, just in general, for society as a whole. Right. And so we've used this term when we did we did an economic episode with, I can't remember her name, the economist.
The
Holly. But
I'll look it up.
I think the episode was going to be called, the title that I'm talking about is Raid versus Trade.
Yeah. Holly Fretwell.
Yes, Holly. I was right. Holly Fretwell. Yes. Okay. So
that was a good episode.
That was a good episode, but she was talking about trade versus raid. And I've recently heard someone else use the term make versus take. Same concept, right? How is wealth generated? Either you create things or you acquire things by taking them from others. And so the reason I was making the comment that we're largely ignorant of history is that while the Commonwealth may have been the most successful in some level of raid, they were not unique. They were doing what everybody else was doing, right? It wasn't like, take Hitler as a horrible example because I've already brought him up, right? It wasn't like this was a Hitler character being sort of the anomaly to how everybody else is operating as a government or as a, monarchy, but essentially as a government. And so I just think that we don't have the right conversations, right? Like, I feel like so much of these conversations are like virtue signaling that I'm against the oppressor, as opposed to sort of what I was saying about before with regards to, are we going to have an honest conversation about what is the benefit? Do we really want to get rid of it? Is there, with regards to the Queen and the Commonwealth's involvement in our electoral / democracy system, right? Like, are we going to have a real conversation? Or are we just going to virtue signal that we think the colonizer was bad? Like that's where I'm like, what are we doing? Or are we just going to pretend?
Pretend what?
Well, pretend that the Queen was, or the Commonwealth was exceptionally evil, and we have to rid them of everything in our country. Like, to me, that's pretending. Like, that's not a true representation of history. Not to say that their government did some things right and wrong, or that you have criticisms in the way that they made decisions, but it's lacking a conversation about the fact that, and I'm making this scenario up, but let's say they colonized an area of Africa. Well, the tribes there.
Well, hold on. What? Wait, but they did colonize.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Africa.
The next part that I was about to say is what I'm making.
Oh, I thought you said like the metaphorically,
so they colonized a place, but what was happening in the place before they colonized it? Likely the exact same thing. It was just, 1/100th of the size and
Smaller
10 different
scale.
tribes, right? Like, those tribes were all raiding with each other, killing each other, stealing each other's land. But then the guy with the bigger hammer came along, and because they won, we now look at them as like, oh, they were exceptionally evil. Right? That's the point I'm trying to make, is like, we're not, like, while you can have criticism, I'm not saying that they didn't do it, like there aren't criticisms, that maybe there's legacies of the way they did things that are problematic and we need to fix them. Totally different conversation. But it's like, oh, we're going to call them the oppressor when they were basically doing what everybody else was doing, and what the tribe that they raided was doing to the tribe next door to them. Right? Like, they basically did the same thing, but because they won, we call them the oppressor. Right? And that's why I say, like, ignorant of history, because, like, take early 1800s, early 1600s, like, for all of mankind up until the last 200, American experiment time frame, there was so much of this raiding, right? Like our billionaires episode, how much did we talk about, that king that was like ruling a huge place? I recently heard a podcast, I think I shared it with you in our chat, where they were talking about him actually being very much like letting countries that were under his kingdom or places sort of self-govern. And it was like, but it was a sort of partnership with regards to protection. And so I only say that to say there's better versions of raiding and worse, because at the same time, if I got to protect my border and you're starting to encroach on it, well, now we end up battling over where's my property, where's your property, where's your, crops and my crop, right? So the violence becomes just the way the monarchy systems sort of protected their regions.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I stumbled across Sam's article on why I'm honoring the Queen. Did you read it?
No, I did not. So educate me. What does Sam got to say?
No, because it sounds like what you said. It sounds like what you were saying, and he said this. Another reason why I'm honoring the Queen is because despite the injustices against my ancestors, the British monarchy were instrumental in protecting my Fanti tribe from our rivals, the Ashanti, in Ghana. The Ashanti were significantly more powerful than the Fanti. They were actually an empire, perhaps the most powerful empire in sub-Saharan Africa, and they wanted to expand their empire by conquering Fanti territories. This forced my ancestors to become allies with Britain. Britain eventually colonized Ghana, but I don't know what would have happened to my ancestors if Britain hadn't protected them from the Ashanti.
Yeah, you're right. Like great minds think alike, I guess.
No. And I bring all that up because there was an article from The Guardian, which is and it said Queen's death intensifies criticism of British Empire's violent atrocities. And so the way how the article is laid out, it has tweets from prominent Black people criticizing the crown. And one was from Karen Ate, and she said, Black and brown people around the world who were subject to horrendous cruelties and economic deprivation under British colonialism are allowed to have feelings about Queen Elizabeth. After all, they were her quote unquote subjects too. And then Jamel Hill said, journalists are tasked with putting legacies into full context. So it is entirely appropriate to examine the Queen and her role in the devastating and her impact of continued colonialism. So and there's more, but yeah. But
Yeah,
Joel,
yep.
sorry, go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
I
man.
was gonna say the colonialism thing. Like, I really think, is sort of a, I'll use a horrible word here. It's a bit of a dog whistle, right? Like, in the sense of, oh, if I use the word colonizer, or basically, I'm talking about the oppressor, and you have to agree with me, almost in sort of the the way the discourse goes today.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I what's funny is they want to colonize my child's brain with their ideologies,
Mhm.
but they don't see that as similar in any regard.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So then what's your 2 cents?
So I think that the monarchy is a really interesting concept, especially from an economic side. And I was listening to a lecture series from Hans Hermann Hoppe this week, and he was sort of talking about the idea of a government owning the land and operating the land, in contrast to a monarchy. And for the monarchy, it's their property. For a government official or a government, they're sort of like a property manager. And this comparison is similar to what if for the more business slash finance related people there in the corporations. There's this concept of agency, in that managers are an agent acting on behalf of the owner, and you always have to worry about that agent is going to potentially pursue their own their own benefits at the behest or the detriment, I should say, of the actual owner. And so, in bringing this back to, I see a similar dichotomy between, let's call it an owner-run business, i.e., a monarchy owns the land. They're going to steward the land in a manner that preserves it to pass it on to their children. And in a government scenario, well, economics has this principle called the tragedy of the commons that essentially is referring to the fact that when nobody is really owning a property, it's going to be overconsumed by all the users and not upkeep. There's not enough upkeep.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, this is where I think monarchies have fallen out of favor for a lot of us, just thinking about the way, democracy is the new thing. It's the more culturally or historically relevant. And so I think we fail sometimes to see the value in monarchies because we see them as we've moved on from that. That's in the past.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if I had the ability to voluntarily or consensually move into a monarchy and move out of a monarchy, the fact that they're stewarding the land differently, if they're treating their subjects as free and sovereign individuals, the whole constitutional concept is about restraining the tyranny of kings. So if they're following that piece, then maybe actually monarchies, and a lot of libertarians actually lean this way, monarchy would be beneficial or more fruitful or more prosperous in the long run, or has the potential to be, than because of that idea of stewarding, as well as the dilemma becomes let's call it the the moving on of the kingdom, right? So that the next heir taking over may tear down all of that benefit that if it's the son who inherits or the daughter, not based on their merit or their ability to rule, but based on their bloodline. So, I think I've heard of a term like constitutional monarchies or something like that. But I think the idea of a child inheriting or bloodline inheriting
Mhm.
does have a hindrance on the ability to sort of fulfill what I've been saying. So,
Yeah.
I think we're gonna hopefully continue to have conversations. I just saw this thing. I don't know who shared it. Might have been one of you guys. The queen's wealth is exempt from taxes because they want to preserve it and avoid erosion of her wealth. It's funny. Why don't we view taxes as eroding everybody else's wealth? But anyways, I digress.
Yeah. I hear you.
So, what's your 2 cents? What do you want to leave the listener with about the queen and her legacy?
I think that, just thinking about the question, was she a good queen? Um, I would say no. She was a safe queen. And like, and almost a little too safe, because yeah, like with the allegations against the British Empire and her reigning for so long and overseeing a lot of some of these atrocities and being a
Prince
part of it.
Andrew.
Yeah, and being able to and not, and I guess maybe because I'm a product of my era and my time, where she didn't, she even put out a tweet. She didn't hasn't really addressed those things or apologized formally, from what I know. But she seemed, pretty safe. And when I mean safe, I mean like behind closed doors and living the queen life, kind of like that ivory tower type scholar, away from the people. And I think as it relates to us as Canadians, you know, right? So just to remember that the queen, how does that relate to us? Is she, well, technically she's the queen of Canada, but has no real power, right? So that's why we have the governor general, and the governor general is a representative of the queen over here. So she doesn't really have, yeah, she doesn't have any power. And then when Charles III, becomes the king, he'll be the king of Canada. And this is why when citizens come to the country, they swear an allegiance to the Queen of Canada. And so, like, I'm thinking, like, as a people, we have a leader who doesn't have any real power and doesn't have any real presence and is not really with us. But I think people have been a bit nostalgic about her reign, and her being a queen, and it sounds great and it feels great. And she's been pretty nice and pretty diplomatic during her reign, and carried herself with dignity, not in the tabloids. So that's cool. But I think, just definitely just reminds me, like, making sure that, or reminds me that, as Christians, you know, Jesus Christ is our king, of course, obviously, and that we swear allegiance to him, and we take our direction and cues from him, and that we conduct ourselves in a way as citizens of his kingdom, and not citizens of the Queen's kingdom.
Yeah, you made one comment there that makes me think. You said about her being safe, and she didn't, almost like ruling from the ivory tower. And I watched you shared a tweet. I'll put it in the show notes page from BBC News Africa, and I just sort of wondered how much in her early years as a queen would that perception have been much different, right? Like, I mean, she's been old as dirt for our entire adulthood, right? Like, she was so old that, like, not to say that she didn't travel and she didn't do things, but like, she's living out her life, finishing her reign, and I would say 100% she was, like the word you used was safe, right? But as like a 25-year-old or like, cause she was a queen really young.
At 25.
Right?
Yeah, 25.
Yeah, 25. So as a 25-year-old, how
Mhm.
much was she ruling in a much different manner? How much more active was she? Maybe she was more controversial. It's just so far removed from us that like, unless we become, historians and really try to like learn about her life, we have fifth of her reign that we perceived. And that's literally how many, how frail was she in the last part of her life in contrast to, I just use the example of like how much travel she did and how much more travel she did back then versus now. I don't know the answer, but that could
She
be a
did a
way
lot
to
of travel. She traveled a
yeah,
lot.
right. And that's where I'm getting that from that BBC News Africa video. It was like 4 minutes long. I thought it was great. It was a great little summary. Of obviously just giving some perspectives of her reign, and involvement with the
And
Commonwealth.
tyranny on
Yes,
the African continent.
yes, that a little bit of that too. But what's crazy is like she's also like really close with Nelson Mandela, right? And there or was obviously, but it, that's sort of highlighted in there too, and it sort of goes like, okay, is calling her actions tyrannical like an oversimplification? Because I just think about our Sir John A. Macdonald episode, right? Like that's sort of similar type of language used towards him, but is that fair? I don't know, right? Unless we really dig in and sort of look at what was she faced with and the decisions she had to make. Maybe she was making the best of a bad situation, but we just want to call it tyranny because it's easier. And again, I'm not saying she wasn't tyrannical. I'm just saying it's really easy from, looking back 50 years on a very surface level to sort of judge in a manner that calls her the oppressor, which is something that I would expect people to do even if it wasn't true. So it's very hard for me to judge those comments without doing the due diligence, I guess is the way that I see it.
Six centers. Wagwan. What's your 2 cents? What do you guys think? Do you guys agree with Joel? Is Joel talking reckless? Let us know.
Am I giving her too much grace and maybe a little too much benefit of the doubt?
Yo, hey man, I'll let God give her the grace, man. I ain't giving no grace. God already gave her enough, man.
Yeah. Yep. As the coin says, Soli Deo Gratia, right? Or something like that. What was it?
Or Queen reigns by the grace of God.
Reigning by the grace of God.
Yeah. All right, let us know what you guys think. You know how to contact us. We'd love to hear what you think. Yeah, holla at us.
6 cents makes change.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
Madden and Mitchell Media.